Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. Today we're going to be getting a call from Webster Tarpley, but before we get the call, I just want to play for you something of Webster's from the past. So let's take a look at this. Minutes left. You know, I'm a product of the Marshall Plan. My mother went over and met my father in Greece after World War II.
Congratulations. If you think of the goodwill that this generated, the only reason the United States is tolerated at all today, anywhere in Europe, is because of the tremendous residual goodwill left over from the Marshall Plan.
Well,
and this ought to be the basis of a foreign policy.
Now,
let's take the things that have worked well, like the Marshall Plan, and use them, rather than the lunatic recipes of these neocons come lately who have cooked nothing but unpalatable dishes.
Now, Webster, since I'm part Greek and Greece was known for democracy, do you think that the world is more ready for democracy than it was in these previous times with Roosevelt, the New Deal, and then before that? What are your insights?
I'm not sure. I don't see any immediate path to world government at the present time, because whenever it's been tried, it's been done under the auspices of oligarchy, not democracy. That's the problem with the European Union, the problem with the United Nations, and so forth. But I think what we can do is to solve the economic problems, because democracy requires a material basis. Democracy is unthinkable in a climate of tremendous exacerbated poverty like we have today. When the neocons talk about democracy, they're talking through their hat, because they talk about it completely separate from any notion of what a living standard has to be in a society so that you can have a reasonable prospect of democracy.
No, Webster, that makes sense, and I think that knowledge is very important. We need meta-think tanks to figure out oligarchy and the need for profits, because obviously some people have made a lot of money off this conflict, and we need to sort of buffer that. So,
well, Athens, of course, might be a wonderful place to have the peace conference. If we're going to have a comprehensive peace conference for the Middle East, you'd want to have it somewhere close to the region, but outside of it, so it wouldn't be on Israeli or Arab territory. And therefore, Athens is a wonderful candidate, and maybe some of the spirit of Plato could come into the proceedings. I would hope so.
Well, Webster, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Paula Gloria. This is Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, and Webster Tarpley has shared some ideas with us about the new world renaissance, and he certainly inspired me to dash off some emails to some of my friends and family in Cyprus and in Greece. So thank you, Webster, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Paula. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye. Now we're with Webster Tarpley. He's on the line. Hi, Webster.
Hello, Paula. How are you?
Good. So we've just played a little bit of you and I in the past talking about the future and some of the brighter possibilities. And, you know, where do you want to go from here? Keeping in mind, Webster, at one time you said that your book wasn't even reviewed by anyone. Even a bad review, you said it would have been good. And I want to congratulate you for your review.
I said it had not been reviewed in any of the major press. There have been numerous reviews on the internet, of course. And Amazon.com had a whole series of laudatory reviews. I guess what you're talking about is there's a new review of my book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror, made in USA by a gentleman called Robert Steele, who's a veteran of the U.S. military and the intelligence community, and he's kind of made a career of reviewing books for Amazon.com. He's reviewed, I think he said, 770 books, and I blush to say this, but he says that out of all of these, my book represents the strongest performance as historical, sociological analysis, that my book, in effect, is the premier work on the question of 9/11 synthetic terrorism, and indeed the one thing that everybody will have to go back to is a kind of a landmark study in the whole question of false flag terrorism in the modern era. And I'm very happy to say that on the basis, I think, to a significant degree of his remarks, because he's very widely known on Amazon. All the Amazon readers and devotees know who he is. He gets all these stars put on his reviews. My book was at 250 in the Amazon rankings. Now, you want to get as close to 1 as you can. In other words, the lower it is, the better it is. So it goes from 1 to about 5 million. So if I'm at 250 or hovering between 250 and 500 over the last couple of weeks, that's very good. The other question, it also indicates a radicalization of the reading public. The other question is, we are now in the midst of I would call it the beginning of what certain sociologists have called a creedal passion period. That's the term of some people that I don't really like, but I'm trying to explain what it is. We're headed now for a tremendous political upsurge on the lines of, let's say, the mass strikes of the 1930s, or indeed the student and anti-war movements of 1968. It's been 40 years since we've had a considerable social movement and political upheaval in this country, and we're now in the beginning of one. And it's the beginning, and we're headed now, of course, for a tremendous world historical crisis, an economic and financial breakdown crisis. We're looking at something along the lines of World War III, unless the neocons are stopped and driven out of public life. And I think you can see that there's a radical anti-Bush backlash in the U.S. population, and somehow that's also spilling over into my book. Let me just mention one or two things. People know, I think, or may know, that I'm the author of the unauthorized biography of George Bush the Elder, Bush 41, as he's known.
Right.
A figure of colossal evil and monstrous incompetence. There's even things are so bad today that some people are nostalgic for Bush 41. This is, I think, very, very misguided, very foolish. Today being Friday, the 27th of October, when we're taping this, is the 10th anniversary of that book appearing on the internet. It was just a couple of days before the 1996 election, the Clinton versus Dole election, if you can remember that I was able to get this on the internet, and it's been there now for 10 years. I believe it represents the oldest continuous anti-Bush website in the world, bar none, as far as I know, to the very best of my knowledge. One of the reasons it's there is that the Bush book has been hacked so much. It's been copied and mirror sites. There are probably 2 or 3 dozen places on the internet where you can read the whole book just as easily as you can.
Webster, you once told me when I realized what a source book this was, you said that the plagiarists didn't even bother to plagiarize the most important parts.
Well, they have. They plagiarized the whole thing.
Oh, really?
There are plagiarists like, well, there are some people who have plagiarized it, like John Loftus. In his book, The Secret War Against the Jews, the very next year, he simply lifted the entire question of Prescott Bush financing Hitler and took it without any attribution, which is, it's academically a no-no, but there's nothing you can do about it except to note that Mr. Loftus is unprincipled and plagiarizes things.
Webster, how much of the Bush family fortune is related to Auschwitz or to the Nazi money?
Well, a lot of it. It's hard to know in detail. It depends on how they've invested it ever since, and of course they keep it in a blind trust. But let's not get sidetracked.
Okay.
Let's stay on the main track here. The idea is that has been up there for 10 years. So out of all the people writing about 9/11, I guess I'm the one who's got the strongest anti-Bush credentials over the years. So what I'm trying to say is that this popularity of my book on Amazon is an index. It's a barometer of what I hope is a political mood, and that is what I would like to stress. I would invite people, go to tarpley.net, www.tarpley.net, and what you have there is this entire book that you can download for free. It's always been for free. The chapter that I would read right now is the chapter called Omaha. And the Omaha chapter is a discussion of a pedophile ring, a pedophile clique or cabal in the Bush machine that is partly expressed through a series of accusations of pedophilia and really horrendous child abuse in the area of Omaha, Nebraska, in which press accounts directly implicated Bush the Elder. And you can see it all there. It's carefully footnoted. The Omaha World Herald, the newspaper of record in that part of the United States, and the Craig Spence ring. In other words, a ring of underage homosexual gigolos who operated out of the White House during the first year of the Bush presidency. And it goes back to a famous headline front-page story of the Washington Times, the main reactionary newspaper here, the Mooney Times here in Washington. in which it turns out that a group of these pedophile victims, gigolos, were taken on a midnight tour of the White House, and they were allowed to help themselves to pieces of the Lincoln China, stealing government property. Yeah. And what this points to is what we've seen. The Foley question is simply the tip of the iceberg. It is beyond doubt that there is a semi-secret cabal of pedophiles, I mean to say, in the Republican Party who control the House of Representatives and to some degree also the Senate. And this is a matter of urgent public interest for any number of reasons. Let me say, first of all, this has nothing to do with anybody's private sexual preference. Private sexual preference is private and is not a political issue, for me at least, in any way. But if you have a semi-secret cabal, it could be bird watchers, it could be vegetarians, it could be pinochle players, and they dominate the United States House of Representatives, the public has a right to know. All the more so because these individuals, in a process of unbelievable hypocrisy, have profiled themselves as homophobes, as people who want to persecute people because of their social preference, despite the fact that they are practicing something similar, or indeed are actually
but Webster
in the closet.
Webster, I think we shouldn't be judgmental, but I think the feeling is if people would hurt children, you know, how are they going to take care of us in terms of voting and our taxes and our jobs? That's why they're not bird watchers.
They're not, no, but I'm saying it doesn't matter what the basis of the cabal is.
Okay.
In this case, we sort of indicated what it is, and that part interests me less than the fact that there's a secret cabal and that these people are all blackmailable. It would seem to be the case that people from the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice have the ultimate source of these revelations about Foley, because they were concerned that the Gonzales Justice Department would not prosecute them for pedophilia and child molestation, but would rather let them off the hook because of political corruption in the Republican administration. But that also makes these legislators in the House and the Senate blackmailable, so that you've got people who are obsessed with being homophobes in public, pedophiles probably in private, and then they're blackmailable because they're in this Republican machine, which is appealing for the votes of gullible evangelical Christian voters in the heartland. So I think this is extremely important. I'm just saying this because the best preface for the current scandal is that chapter from my 1992 book, George Bush, The Unauthorized Biography, that you can read online. So let's just hurry ahead to the present situation. As I think I've said once or twice before in this program, the absolute imperative of this election is to stop World War III, which we are facing now in the very, very near term ahead. It can be a question of days, weeks, months, but we are continuing to lurch along the brink of the abyss. Right now, there are 3 to 4 U.S. naval battle groups concentrated in the Arabian Sea and or the Persian-Arabian Gulf. And this is the precondition for the sneak attack on Iran. The entire effort, of course, in the United Nations by Condi and Bolton has broken down. The Russians are saying no to economic sanctions. The Europeans are willing to have some economic sanctions, but the U.S. is standing alone in the area of provocative economic warfare against Iran. So the Cheney gang, faced with imminent defeat, is looking for the new 9/11 that they will concoct, or the new Gulf of Tonkin that they will concoct. But let's just look perhaps at some of the questions that are raised by this. The imperative is to administer to Bush the biggest possible defeat, a landslide, crushing, catastrophic defeat, which would be a repudiation of Bush the individual, a repudiation of the Iraq war policy, and above all of this global war on terror, the myth that we're at war, that there is this need to subordinate everything to this quest for the phantomatic bin Laden and all the rest of this stuff. Now, the real issue, I would say, in this government is we are living in a one-party state. This is what we had with the communists. This is what we had with the fascists, what we had with the Nazis. In this formal sense, we have 3 branches of government. They're all totally dominated by this desperate, demagogic Republican machine. the presidency, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and now the federal judges, because they've been packed by Bush over the years. So we have no checks and balances. We have no co-equal branches. We have an executive, above all, that's asserting dictatorial power, literally that they can arrest anybody, hold them, throw away the key, no charges, no court, no lawyer, no hearing, no nothing, no habeas corpus. After 700 years of the Anglo-Saxon common law, along comes little George Bush and says, well, we have the global war on terror. Let's throw out the wisdom of something that we somehow managed to keep, at least largely, through the American Revolution, the Civil War, 2 world wars, and the Cold War. We pretty much kept habeas in check. On the basis of this wretched performance that we can go through, there is no basis for the continuing demand for one-party rule. Let me just talk about one aspect of this thing. If we assume that the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives and or the Senate, the House seems to be most likely, in the election, we then go into a kind of interregnum, right? There's that period between the November 7th ballot and the first week of January, when the House of Representatives meets and comes together and elects a new speaker, at which time the leadership would pass to the Democratic Party. During that time, we will, of course, be in maximum danger. There are some scenario writers who are already talking about the danger of the guns of Christmas. That is to say, an artificial crisis, provocations, new 9/11, new Gulf of Tonkin, generated by the Bush-Cheney machine and, above all, their controllers in Wall Street and the City of London during that time of November, December into January. So we've got to be aware of that, first of all. Why is it that the Republicans are so hysterical about the idea of having the House pass back into Democratic rule? One-party rule is the exception in this country. Under Reagan, there was always a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate in his last 2 or 3 years. Under Clinton, except for the first 2 years, there was a Republican Congress. So presidents can get elected by fairly large majorities. They generally have to deal with divided government in the sense that the other party controls the legislative branch. There are some exceptions. Roosevelt, of course, is an exception, but he's an exception in so many ways. The main thing that I expect to happen is this. You can say, and I think it's true, that the Democrats are a miserable excuse for an opposition party. This, in many cases, is undoubtedly true. It's a sad but true case.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
However, we're not dealing with absolutes here. We're dealing with choices, and we're dealing with them under the gun of World War III. So people have got to make up their mind to vote according to the needs of the moment, rather than their preferences in terms of what they would like, because we don't have what we would like. The one thing that I think the Democrats can be relied on to do is to begin to conduct oversight hearings. Now, when you say oversight hearings, people ask, what's that? What
it's
are
like
oversight hearings?
Iran-Contra or Watergate?
Well, we haven't had any since 2001. And, of course, in 2001, the Bush administration was right in. They hadn't had time to have their crimes come to the fore. They had begun committing them, I'm sure, but they had not, in many ways, 9/11 and so forth, but they had not, reached critical mass so that these could be brought up. We have not had any meaningful oversight hearings on any branch of government since the Bush administration has been in office, because in the first year we had the 100-day honeymoon. Soon after that we had 9/11, total hysteria, suspension of all oversight, and then in October 2002 we had what has to be described as the murder, the deliberate murder of Senator Paul Wellstone of Minnesota as he was flying around for his re-election campaign. Here's a senator who would have been the most eloquent voice against the Iraq War. His voice was silenced, and other voices, having seen this murder, were terrorized into silence. And there's a lot of cowardice and bad faith among Democrats in the Congress, having seen what happened to Wellstone. Oh. Now it would change. They've all promised, from Pelosi to Conyers to Rangel to Waxman and all the rest of them, they will do oversight hearings. What does it mean? It means that when you control the House, you have a Democratic speaker. It means the majority of every committee will be Democrats. The chairman of every committee and subcommittee will be a Democrat. They then acquire subpoena power. They can say to John Bolton, they can say to Douglas Feith or Schulski or Cheney, they can say, you come and testify before this committee. And not only that, they can issue one of these classic duces tecum subpoenas, which says not only do you show up, but you bring these and these and these documents. We want to see the paper trail of what you've done. Now think about the kinds of issues that could be involved here. 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, what's being done with Iran? Are acts of war being committed against Iran? I have to commend Congressman Kucinich, Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, a Democrat and a Republican, a left progressive and a real conservative, got together to hold their own informal hearings with no subpoena power in the House just a couple of weeks ago on the danger of a new 9/11, a new Gulf of Tonkin as an October surprise leading to an attack on Iran. But there's much more. There's Katrina. There's prescription drug questions, warrantless wiretaps by the National Security Agency, the SWIFT financing scandal, going and delving into people's banking activities. There's the whole question that has to do with Guantanamo, with Abu Ghraib, with secret prisons, secret renditions, torture. Then there's just crime. Abramoff, all of his corrupt dealings, other lobbyists. Then you've got obviously the pedophile clique in the House of Representatives reaching into the Senate. And
so you don't need 9/11, it sounds like.
And 9/11, I said that was the very first one off the bat.
Okay.
Now in the House, you've got a difference of opinion. Congressman Conyers of Detroit, black, liberal, very good man in my opinion, has said he wants to explore impeachment. Pelosi, I think, who's a much weaker figure, much less attuned to the needs of the American people, obsessed with various issues of her own, has said no, she doesn't think that impeachment is something that should be on the agenda. There will then be a fight in the Democratic Party to see whether the Conyers line or the Pelosi line emerges, just as we have Hillary Clinton and Lieberman saying that the war has to be continued and expanded, and then we've got Congressman Murtha of Pennsylvania, who knows something about war, who says no, the war has got to be ended. That's, again, a moderate imperialist point of view. It's not what I would say, but it's the best you can hope for at the present time. It's interesting that Pelosi is not automatically assured of being the speaker. It might be Murtha. He said at one point he wanted to run for speaker. If you get an influx of the right kind of Democrat into the Democratic caucus, you might find Murtha as the speaker rather than Pelosi, and this would put a whole different face on things, make the critique of the war much, much more effective, because it would be coming from a decorated war hero in the person of Murtha, somebody who has supported the military over the years rather than what Pelosi's been doing. What is the likely response of the neocon fascist madmen of the Bush administration to the prospect of being subpoenaed to come before congressional committees to give testimony and to produce documents? Well, they have a theory called the unitary executive, which is, of course, blatantly unconstitutional, illegal. It's a form of insurrection against the U.S. Constitution that they swear to defend, but they're not going to defend it. They're going to say no. Those subpoenas can't be used against us. We claim executive privilege. We're not coming, and you're not going to get any documents. At that point, there would be an appeal to the courts on the one hand. Who knows what would come out of that? You might get lucky and have a district judge who would rule against the Bushmen. But the higher you go, of course, when you go into the circuit courts of appeals, District of Columbia is packed with reactionaries and neo-fascists. And then, of course, we've got 4 neo-fascist votes on the Supreme Court itself. Difficult to see what might come out of that. There is a possibility that there might be votes against Bush there, because the establishment as a whole, I think, has seen that Bush Cheney have taken leave of reality and of any notion of sanity or political expediency, and they're pursuing obsessive themes of their own internal mental life to some extent anyway. So the establishment at that point might say, vote him down and let's begin to put the pressure on Bush Cheney. The other question, of course, is contempt of Congress. If you flaunt a subpoena and refuse to produce the documents, then you can be judged in contempt of Congress. One recent time I know of this has happened is in, I believe, 1975, the Pike Committee of the House, investigating CIA crimes, issued subpoenas to Henry Kissinger. He refused to produce documents, and he was then given a contempt of Congress citation at that point, richly deserved. That is healthy democratic life. That was the Nixon administration, or Ford in those days. Today we have an administration that's even more extreme in the imperial presidency and so forth. As you go on with this process, it's very likely that any serious oversight committee hearings will begin to unearth impeachable offenses on the parts of all sorts of people. Ashcroft, Gonzalez, right? Ashcroft is gone, Gonzalez is there. Cheney, Rumsfeld, Bush, Condoleezza Rice, absolutely. Hadley at the National Security Council, Wolfowitz when he was there, his successors, Cambone in the Department of Defense. So it's likely that the case for impeachment will come together, whether Pelosi likes it or not, as a product of these investigations. And at the end of this process of subpoenas that are flaunted, contempt of Congress citations, as a matter of the dynamics of the two branches, impeachment of Bush and of other officials, because it doesn't have to start with Bush. It might well start with Rumsfeld under current conditions, or somebody else, Cheney. Under these conditions, it would seem to me that quite independent of the will of this or that weak-kneed Democrat, there's a dynamic for impeachment that would set in. And ultimately, the only person who can impeach George Bush is George Bush, and similarly for
You mean he makes a mistake?
The Boltons and the Cheneys and so forth. And I think that is the great hope. We would be facing a constitutional crisis, which I'm afraid is long overdue, and it would be based on the dictatorial pretensions, the totalitarian pretensions of the Bush neocon fascist madmen to say, no, we're above the law, we don't respond to the courts, we don't respond to the Congress, we are a free-floating, dictatorial, Bonapartist clique in these institutions, and we do what we want. And I think that is also the best chance of salvaging the Democratic Party.
Is
what
that
the Democrats need to
Webster?
Do is get in there and fight.
Webster, is that how Bush impeaches himself? Because when he's asked to produce these documents, when he's subpoenaed, he doesn't do it?
Yes, that's, if you look back to Nixon, that's pretty much what he did. It was called the Stone Wall, and Nixon erected a series of stone walls, and of course within days or weeks, each of these stone walls would crumble, and at the end of it, he had to disgorge very, very damning materials. You could say, let's investigate the relation of Dick Cheney's energy task force,
Webster, we
to
got
the oil price being over $3, and just take it from there. You'll get to impeachable stuff before too long.
Okay, Webster, we just finished, so we'll have to carry on the next one.
Okay.
Okay, but
I think we did justice to the
Yes.
theme. Did it come across?
Yes.
Good,
But let's be
wonderful.
quiet now, and then I'll set the next tape.